From desert rebel to dictator. This is the untold saga of Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi. The untold story of a desert revolutionary. The story of Muammar Gaddafi begins not in a palace, but in a humble tent under the blazing sun of the Libyan desert, near the remote coastal town of Sirte. Born in 1942 to a poor Bedouin family, his early years were shaped by the harsh realities of desert life, survival, tribal loyalty, and the relentless struggle against poverty. Yet beneath the endless sands, a restless spirit was taking form, a man destined to change the fate of a nation and challenge the world. Libya, at that time, was a land trapped between empires and ideologies. Decades of Italian colonization had left deep scars, and after the collapse of fascist Italy during World War II, the Kingdom of Libya was established under King Idris, a monarch closely allied with Western powers, especially Britain and the United States. Libya was rich in oil, but its wealth was controlled by foreign interests, and its people remained largely marginalized. Against this backdrop of foreign dominance and internal inequality, a new wave of Arab nationalism was sweeping the region. The fiery rhetoric of Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser echoed through the streets of Tripoli and Benghazi, stirring hopes of liberation, unity, and revolution. Young Muammar Gaddafi, a rebellious and ambitious military officer, was deeply inspired by these ideas. He saw himself as a revolutionary, destined to free Libya from the chains of monarchy, colonialism, and Western interference. By the late 1960s, Gaddafi had risen through the military ranks and built a loyal group of officers who shared his vision. On September 1st, 1969, in a bold and carefully planned bloodless coup, Gaddafi and his comrades seized control while King Idris was away receiving medical treatment abroad. The old monarchy crumbled overnight. Libya was proclaimed a republic, and though Gaddafi never officially took the title of president, he became the undisputed leader, a young man with radical ideas and unyielding determination. In the early years of his rule, Gaddafi presented himself as a reformer and visionary. He expelled all foreign military bases, nationalized Libya's oil industry, and redirected the enormous revenues into ambitious social programs. Schools were built, hospitals opened, and homes constructed. Education and healthcare became free for all, and unprecedented rights were granted to women in a deeply conservative society. Literacy rates soared, and Libya rapidly transformed from one of Africa's poorest nations into one of its richest per capita. But behind this gleaming facade lurked a harsher reality. Gaddafi's political ideology was laid out in his infamous Green Book, published throughout the 1970s. It proposed a radical third universal theory, rejecting both capitalism and communism, advocating instead for a system of direct democracy through popular committees and congresses. Yet, in practice, this political experiment was a facade. Real power remained firmly in Gaddafi's hands and those of his inner circle. Opposition voices were silenced with intimidation, imprisonment, or worse. Secret police operated ruthlessly. Prisons like Abu Salim became infamous for torture and disappearances. Beyond Libya's borders, Gaddafi sought to export his revolutionary ideals. He funneled Libyan oil wealth into a myriad of armed movements, from the Irish Republican Army in Europe to Palestinian militant groups in the Middle East, and revolutionary factions across Africa and Latin America. He cast himself as an anti-colonial hero and a Pan-African unifier, championing the cause of the oppressed worldwide. Yet, his aggressive foreign policy and alleged involvement in acts of terrorism, including the 1986 Berlin disco bombing and the 1988 Lockerbie plane bombing, turned him into a pariah on the global stage.
Zawiya is 50 kilometers west of Tripoli. Witnesses tell VOA that troops and tanks loyal to Muammar Gaddafi are lined up along
The world's response was brutal. In 1986, the United States launched airstrikes on Tripoli and Benghazi, targeting Gaddafi's compound.
My fellow Americans, at 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities. The attacks were concentrated and carefully targeted to minimize casualties among the Libyan people, with whom we have no quarrel. From initial reports, our forces have succeeded in their mission. Several weeks ago in New Orleans, I warned...
The attack killed several civilians, including Gaddafi's adopted daughter. Libya faced years of crippling economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Yet through it all, Gaddafi's grip on power remained ironclad. Then came a dramatic and unexpected shift in the early 2000s. Facing overwhelming pressure and shifting global geopolitics, Gaddafi renounced terrorism, agreed to dismantle Libya's weapons of mass destruction programs, and sought rapprochement with the West. He compensated victims of past terrorist attacks and welcomed Western leaders to Tripoli. For a brief period, the world saw a reformed Gaddafi shaking hands with figures like Tony Blair and Nicolas Sarkozy. In 2009, he delivered a sprawling, unconventional speech at the United Nations that mixed criticism of the international order with wild conspiracy theories.
متساوية كبيرها وصغيرها. العكس هو أن مجلس الأمن يعمل كذا وكذا بناء على أوامر الجمعية العامة. هذه هي الأمم، ما هي 190 أمة. هذه هي الأمم المتحدة مع بعضها، وليس مجلس الأمن اللي في القاعة هذه 10 أنفار. كيف نطمئن على السلام العالمي؟ إذا كان مصير بيد 10 وسيطروا عليهم 4 أو 5 وتسيطر عليهم دولة واحدة بعد ذلك. مشكلة لهم وكالة دولية. إذا كانت دولية تخضع لها كل دول العالم. إذا كانت ليست دولية نحن نقفل في وجه الباب ولا نعترف بها اعتبارا من الآن. مجلس الأمن مسلط علينا، وكالة الطاقة الدولية مسلطة علينا، محكمة العدل الدولية مسلطة علينا.
A final reminder of his complex and unpredictable nature. But beneath the surface, the regime's brutality never ceased. Political repression continued behind closed doors.
الله أكبر. إذا لم يتحقق كل هذا أنا بعد ذلك سنعلن الزحف. سنعلن الزحف المقدس. أيوة. وأنا أراه معمر القذافي قائد أممي. أنا دافع عني الملايين. أنا سنوجه نداء للملايين من الصحراء إلى الصحراء، وسنزحف أنا والملايين لتطهير ليبيا شبر شبر، بيت بيت، دار دار، زنقة زنقة، فرد فرد، حتى تطهر البلد من الدنس والإرجاس. لا يمكن نسمح لليبيا تضيع بين يدينا بدون مبرر في غوط الباطل. من يسمح بهذا؟ أنا معي الملايين في جمع أولادها من بكرة. اخرجوا من بيوتكم يا اللي أنتم بتحبوا معمر القذافي، رجال، نساء، بنات، أطفال، يا اللي مع معمر القذافي الثورة، مع معمر قذافي للمجد، العزة لليبيا، للشعب الليبي في القمة الذي يريد المجد.
In 2011, as the Arab Spring swept through the Middle East and North Africa, Libya erupted in protest. Citizens demanded freedom, justice, and an end to decades of oppression. Gaddafi's response was merciless and unrelenting. He called the demonstrators rats and vowed to crush the uprising house by house. The country descended into a bloody civil war. The international community watched closely. NATO, with the backing of the United Nations, launched airstrikes against Gaddafi's forces, tipping the balance in favor of the rebels. After months of brutal fighting, on October 20th, 2011, in a final chaotic confrontation near Sirte, Gaddafi was captured and killed. The graphic footage of his death spread worldwide, marking a violent end to a controversial reign. Yet Gaddafi's death did not bring the promised peace. Libya fractured into competing militias, rival governments, and tribal factions. Foreign powers inserted themselves into the conflict, turning Libya into a proxy battlefield. A country once united under one flag became a fractured land of chaos and uncertainty, a nation still searching for its future more than a decade later. Muammar Gaddafi's legacy remains fiercely contested. To some, he was a revolutionary visionary who lifted Libya from poverty and challenged imperialism. To others, he was a ruthless dictator whose regime was built on fear, violence, and corruption. His life was a saga of grand ambitions and tragic flaws, a mirror reflecting the complexities of power, identity, and revolution. In the end, Gaddafi's story is not just about one man, but about the hopes, dreams, and struggles of an entire nation caught between desert sands and the storm of history.